Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a crucial mission, and it's tailored specifically for you, the advanced English learner. We're going way beyond the usual grammar rules and, flashcards.
Yeah, we really are.
We are deep diving into advanced listening proficiency. It's the one skill that our source materials consistently point to as the absolute cornerstone of genuine linguistic mastery.
That's so right. And if you think about how language is usually taught, listening, well, it often gets the short end of the stick,
Right.
especially when you get to that advanced level.
Right.
It's sort of treated as this passive skill that'll just, improve on its own.
Magically.
Magically, exactly. So our mission today is to completely change that perception. We're here to pull out actionable strategies, profound practical insights into how you can deliberately refine and elevate your listening skills.
So moving from just being competent
To being truly outstanding.
and this neglect, which the research we've looked at really highlights, it creates this massive gap. Listening is the very first skill we develop in our own language. I mean, think about a baby just absorbing sound.
Yes.
Yet, once we start learning a new language as adults, it often gets what our sources call a disproportionately scant allocation of pedagogical focus.
It's a great phrase.
It is. We just assume that because we can read Shakespeare, we should be able to understand a fast-talking London cab driver.
And that expectation, well, frankly, it's often just wishful thinking, isn't it?
It is.
And that gap is precisely what stops so many advanced learners from reaching what you might call the peak of listening fluency.
Okay.
And this doesn't mean you need to catch every single syllable or, every esoteric vocabulary word. That's not the goal.
No.
The goal is to cultivate this sophisticated cognitive ability to extract the core message, the overarching meaning, the gist.
The gist, right.
Even when you're challenged by, say, confusing delivery or background noise, or you miss some of those granular details.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because if the benchmark for success is getting the gist, even when some words escape you, which, let's be honest, happens to me constantly, even in my first language,
To all of us, yeah.
then we really need to establish why this skill is so crucial, so foundational, before we even start tackling the how-to.
Absolutely. Let's lay that groundwork.
Let's start with the basics. Why is listening so fundamentally important? Our source material has this fantastic phrase for it. They call it the primal linguistic interface.
I love that. It's such an elegant observation, really.
It is.
Because if you just observe the earliest stages of language acquisition, a child's interaction with the world is almost entirely receptive.
Right. They're not talking.
They're not speaking, they're not writing, they're simply absorbing what the sources call the ambient linguistic soundscape.
So the cadence, the sounds, the rhythm of their world.
That's it. They become expert listeners long, long before they're even novice speakers.
And that analogy is so vital because it reminds us that absorption is the bedrock. You have to take the language in correctly before you can produce it effectively.
Absolutely. And, the importance of active listening extends far beyond that initial absorption phase. The research we analyzed shows that active listening acts as a kind of crucible, a refining furnace.
A crucible, I like that.
Yeah. It's where your understanding of the language's fundamental components is actually forged.
So what kind of components are we talking about?
Well, this includes phonological intricacies. So how the sounds actually link together in a stream of speech.
Okay.
It includes prosodic features where the emphasis and the stress fall in a sentence.
The music of it.
The music of it, exactly. And crucially, syntactic structures, how sentences are actually built and sequenced in real-time speech, which, often differs wildly from what you see in a textbook.
So if I'm actively listening to someone, my brain isn't just registering noise. It's building a mental map of how the language actually works, sentence by sentence, inflection by inflection.
Precisely. It imbues learners with an intuitive grasp of the language's inherent rhythm and cadence.
An intuitive grasp.
Think of it this way. If you hear a native speaker ask a question, the intonation rises at the end, right? If you haven't internalized that through listening, you might speak a perfectly grammatical sentence, but use the wrong musicality.
And it just sounds off.
It sounds unnatural. Or worse, it could be confusing to the other person.
And that intuitive feeling, that ability to recognize the language's internal music, that leads us directly to this linguistic pyramid concept from the sources.
Right.
What does that actually mean for our advanced learner?
It means the benefits you get from strong listening skills are not isolated. They're not in a silo. They are systemic.
Okay.
Superior listening ability invariably augments and improves every other skill. Your speaking, your reading, and your writing.
So it's the foundation.
It is the fundamental base layer of the entire linguistic structure. If that base is unstable, your speaking might be hesitant, your pronunciation will likely suffer. And even your reading comprehension can lack that depth of nuance that comes from understanding how tone and intent shape meaning.
It really connects everything. If you hear correctly, you speak more clearly. If you understand the flow of a spoken argument, you can write more persuasive and coherent arguments. We have to stress the real-world application here, too, because this isn't just about passing a test or an exam.
No, it's profoundly practical. Listening is constantly required in the heat of real-world interaction.
Constantly.
Whether you are navigating a complex negotiation in a professional setting or picking up on subtle cues in a social engagement or just trying to watch a movie without subtitles.
Yeah.
Your auditory skills are perpetually engaged. The need to refine this skill is self-evident because it's the constant interface between you and the English-speaking world.
What's truly fascinating to me, though, is the struggle point. We've established that advanced learners often read incredibly well. They can handle complex texts, but then they hit this wall when they're faced with a native speaker moving at full speed. Why is that?
It comes down to the sheer dynamic chaos of authentic spoken English.
Chaos is a good word for it.
It is. Reading is controlled. You can go at your own pace. Listening is instantaneous. The difficulty comes from the velocity of delivery, the constant use of colloquialisms, linking words, and those unique ways people speak within specific social groups, their sociolects.
Ah, right.
And all this together can make even a seemingly simple conversation feel opaque, like you're listening through a thick pane of glass.
And that is the problem we are now determined to solve.
Exactly.
That distinction between just receiving sound waves and actively processing them. That's our next big focus. We're introducing the conceptual difference between mere hearing and genuine active listening.
Yes.
We are all subjected to just this immense barrage of auditory stimuli every day, traffic noise, background music, snippets of conversation. But active listening, as our research defines it, is an entirely different cognitive beast.
It requires intentionality. That's the key word. Hearing is involuntary. Your ears pick up sound whether you want them to or not. Active listening, however, is a deliberate choice. It requires a conscious marshaling of your full attention. You aren't merely letting sound waves hit your eardrum and, expecting magic to happen. You are actively engaging with the signal.
Can you break down the specific components of that active process? What is the brain actually doing when it's actively listening in a second language?
Okay, so it involves three critical simultaneous cognitive commitments.
Three commitments.
First, there's a concerted effort towards semantic comprehension. This is where you're linking the sounds you hear to their meaning, making sure the concepts register, not just the individual words.
Okay, so meaning first.
Meaning first. Second, there's a conscious endeavor toward mnemonic retention.
Okay, memory.
Right, making sure that relevant information is stored, at least briefly, so you can formulate a response or, follow the thread of the argument.
Got it.
And finally, all of this demands a profound level of cognitive presence. You have to be fully in the room with the conversation, dedicated to understanding the speaker, not just formulating your rebuttal.
I think we can all relate to the opposite of that, though. Passive reception.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so remarkably easy for words to just enter your auditory field and then subsequently, poof, vanish into the cognitive void. Especially if you're tired or stressed or trying to multitask.
Yes.
It's like trying to fill a bucket that has a giant hole in the bottom.
And that is the single biggest trap for advanced learners. They feel they're immersing themselves by having, say, English talk radio on while they work. But if that cognitive engagement isn't there, the language just becomes background noise.
Just static.
Just static. But when you embrace that rigorous active approach, the payoff in what the sources call pragmatic utility is huge.
So how does that active listening actually translate into your communication? What's the practical result?
Well, it enhances your ability to discern subtle contextual nuances.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Those shifts in tone or volume or implied meaning that tell you so much more than the literal words themselves.
The subtext.
The subtext, exactly. And because you've correctly processed the emotional or professional context, you're able to formulate a much more appropriate response, what we call an apposite response.
So you don't just react, you respond thoughtfully.
That's it.
That seems to tie directly into social success and, building relationships.
Absolutely. Superior listening skills foster much more robust interpersonal rapport. When you genuinely hear someone, they feel respected, they feel understood.
For sure.
And this not only makes you a better conversationalist, but it also facilitates more accurate articulation on your part because you've processed the input correctly.
It's a feedback loop.
It is. Ultimately, being a perceptive, keen listener, a perspicacious listener, as the sources say, is a distinct advantage in every single domain, from academic study to high-stakes business meetings. It moves you from merely surviving a conversation to genuinely thriving in it.
Thriving. That's the goal. But we can't ignore the obstacles that are standing in the way of that goal. Let's confront the unique frustrations faced by someone who is smart, capable, and already speaks English well, but still gets lost in real-time conversation.
Let's do it.
We're shifting our focus now to the array of hurdles that advanced learners constantly encounter. If you are listening and you feel like you've hit a plateau, these are very likely the culprits. So what, according to the sources, is the most formidable challenge related to how English actually sounds?
The first one is, it's overwhelming. It's the kaleidoscope of accents.
Ah, yes.
When you learn English in a classroom, you likely learn one standardized version, maybe General American or received pronunciation.
The Queen's English.
The Queen's English, right. But in the real world, you're going to encounter speakers from London, Dublin, Texas, Sydney, Mumbai.
Everywhere.
The sheer phonetic divergence between, say, a Scottish brogue, an Australian inflection, and a Southern American drawl can be profoundly disorienting.
It's not just that the vocabulary changes a little bit, it's the fundamental music of the language that's different.
Completely different. So it's not just one language you have to master. It's a multitude of regional and national sound systems.
And then there's the speed. What's the second major hurdle?
That is the sheer velocity of native speech. Native speakers, we articulate at such a rapid clip and we use so much connected speech where the words all run together that maintaining what the sources call cognitive synchronicity becomes arduous.
So your brain just can't keep up.
Exactly. The moment you start trying to translate the first 3 words, the speaker's already on word 10.
Yeah.
It feels like trying to run a race when your opponent has a head start and is moving twice as fast. You're just left with this amorphous, sometimes impenetrable sonic blur.
And that difficulty is often compounded by the third challenge, non-literal language. This is where your knowledge of vocabulary and grammar is almost useless because the meaning isn't contained in the individual words.
Exactly. We have to talk about the pervasive infiltration of slang, phrasal verbs, and idiomatic expressions.
The stuff that's everywhere.
It is. Native speakers constantly intersperse their discourse with these casual, non-literal phrases that, if you subjected them to direct translation, would render the entire utterance completely nonsensical.
Yeah, you'd be totally lost.
This is where linguistic confusion can become just complete bewilderment.
And the sources offered that perfect, classic example to illustrate this exact point.
The phrase, "It's raining cats and dogs."
Right.
If you are a learner and you literally try to understand meteorological conditions based on falling mammals, you'd be thoroughly perplexed.
You'd be looking out the window for a poodle.
You would. You need a contextual and cultural database to know that this just means heavy rain, and that database is built exclusively through extensive listening exposure.
The phrase break a leg on opening night would be equally terrifying if you took it literally.
Horrifying.
And finally, a factor we often overlook, the environment itself, the actual place where you're listening.
Yes. We cannot neglect the insidious challenge of background ambient noise. Advanced learners often try to engage in dynamic conversations in really bustling environments, a loud coffee shop, a busy railway station, a crowded pub.
Right.
In these situations, the signal-to-noise ratio can be so degraded that just focusing on the speaker's articulation becomes an exercise in, well, the sources say, utter futility.
You're just fighting to hear them.
You are. You're constantly struggling to filter out external distractions just to isolate the voice you need to hear, and that drains your cognitive energy so rapidly.
So the combined effect of the speed, the accent variation, the idioms, and the noise that can create that plateau we mentioned. But here's the good news. We are not leaving you stuck in that struggle. We're moving now into the practical strategies, the specific, deliberate steps you can take to fortify your auditory capabilities, regardless of these challenges.
Okay, let's begin with strategies you can implement right now, starting with controlled environments where you can really build that muscle memory. The foundational starting point is engaging with deliberately modulated audio.
Okay, so what exactly should the listener look for in a modulated resource? What does that mean?
You should seek out content, whether it's specialized podcasts or simplified audiobooks or educational YouTube channels that are specifically designed for advanced language acquisition.
Got it.
These resources purposefully feature slightly slower pacing, exceptionally clear articulation, and they often use language with a slightly lower density of highly obscure slang.
So it's like a training ground.
It serves as invaluable scaffolding. It builds your confidence by ensuring a high rate of initial success, making the listening challenge manageable before you dive into the unfiltered high-velocity native material. It gives you an accurate phonetic map to follow.
That strategic reduction in pace allows your brain to actually catch up and process the syntax without the pressure of a native speaker's relentless speed. Now, let's tackle the strategic use of subtitles. This is always debated. Should I use them or not?
The answer is, use them judiciously. The recommended approach is a measured weaning process.
A weaning process, okay.
Start by immersing yourself in complex visual media, like a series or a movie, with the English subtitles on. This links the visual word form to the audible sound, it reinforces correct spelling, and it helps you distinguish homophones.
Okay.
Then, as your comprehension improves, as your brain naturally starts to recognize certain phrases, you must progressively phase them out entirely.
Why is that weaning process so critical? Why can't you just keep them on?
Because a reliance on subtitles actually trains your brain to prioritize reading over listening.
Ah, okay.
You stop relying on the sound, and instead you rely on that visual confirmation. The goal of advanced listening is to transition to an unadulterated auditory experience, where the sound is the meaning.
Right.
If you can only understand the dialogue when the text is present, you haven't truly refined your listening skill. You've just become a very fast reader.
That's a great point. And for content you genuinely enjoy, the benefit of iterative rewatching or re-listening is enormous. How should you approach a second or third pass of the same content?
Subsequent exposure to the same material is remarkably potent because your focus shifts.
How so?
Well, the first time you watch something, it's typically dedicated to the plot or the general context. Your brain is trying to answer the question, what is happening?
Right.
The second or third time, the pressure of plot comprehension is gone. So your brain is freed up to concentrate on the linguistic architecture.
Okay.
The subtle use of a metaphor, the specific phrasal verbs, or those speech segments that initially just felt blurry. Re-listening inevitably illuminates nuances or details that were completely overlooked in the first pass.
And linking back to that ultimate goal, extracting the gist, we have the critical strategy of focusing on keywords.
This is fundamental for real-time fluency. In a dynamic conversation, if you try to process every single article, preposition, and auxiliary verb, you will fall behind, guaranteed. The key is developing the instinct to hone in on the pivotal terms, the main nouns, main verbs, and key modifiers that convey the overarching semantic thrust of the utterance.
So you're grabbing the most important pieces.
Exactly. If you miss the or of, but you catch market, collapse today, you have 80% of the meaning, which is more than enough to participate. This skill is all about filtering noise and prioritizing the signal.
Excellent. Now let's give it to resource curation. If someone has a spare 30 minutes in their day, what's the most effective medium for consistent practice?
The sources invariably counsel engagement with podcasts.
Of course.
They represent an immense treasure trove of authentic discourse. And crucially, many podcasts geared toward advanced learners offer dialogue that is authentic, yet often thoughtfully moderated, making them an impeccable entry point.
And the practical advantage of podcasts is just their sheer utility and portability.
Exactly. They offer an unparalleled opportunity for immersive engagement because you can integrate them seamlessly into your daily routine during your commute, while you're doing chores, or during moments of leisure. You're turning dead time into productive learning time.
For sure.
We'd recommend sampling widely. Look for interview-style shows for spontaneous dialogue and maybe narrative shows for highly articulated speech.
An equally commendable option, particularly for those who appreciate a good narrative flow, is audiobooks.
Yes. Audiobooks offer a significant advantage over many other forms of media. First, You get to follow a clear, continuous narrative, which provides immense contextual support.
Right, you always know what's going on.
And second, the content is typically rendered by professional narrators whose articulation and rhythm are exemplary. I mean, they're trained to speak clearly and engagingly. The practical advice here is to start with linguistically accessible titles, perhaps young adult fiction or straightforward nonfiction, and then incrementally ascend to more complex literary works as your comprehension solidifies.
It's like level stacking your reading list, but for your ears.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And finally, for those whose interests lean towards entertainment, the most profoundly enjoyable avenue for auditory refinement, TV and films.
This is such a powerful tool because the visual cues, body language, facial expressions, the setting, they provide crucial nonverbal context that really aids listening comprehension.
Yeah.
So immersing yourself in English language series and films is profoundly effective. The guidance is similar to audiobooks. Start with productions featuring relatively straightforward dialogue and clear sound mixing, often sitcoms or documentaries,
Right.
and then ambitiously challenge yourself with more lexically and structurally intricate narratives, like dense dramas or historical fiction. And critically, we have to reiterate the necessity of that subtitle weaning process.
Don't let the visual safety net keep you from training your auditory processing speed. We've covered passive intake and resource management. Now let's delve into the active, interactive strategies you can employ that demand physical engagement. We'll start with one of the most profoundly effective techniques mentioned in the research, the shadowing technique.
Shadowing. Yes. This entails listening to a speaker a very short clip, maybe 2 to 5 seconds, and almost concurrently attempting to replicate their utterance.
So you're literally speaking right after them.
You become the speaker's shadow, mimicking their speech pattern, their rhythm, and their intonation almost instantaneously. It's a powerful, active form of mimicry.
That sounds incredibly challenging. How does someone start shadowing effectively without just getting flustered?
You absolutely must start small and slow.
Okay.
Use a piece of that modulated audio we talked about and focus intensely on 2 elements. First, the prosody, the music of the sentence, the stress on keywords, the pauses. And second, the connected speech, how native speakers link the end of one word to the beginning of the next. For instance, instead of focusing on did you must try to reproduce the sound didja.
Didja.
Right.
Shadowing is instrumental in fostering accurate pronunciation, assimilating those specific features, and enhancing overall fluency. The initial iterations, they don't need to be flawlessly executed. The primary objective is to train your vocal apparatus to the language's inherent rhythm and flow, bridging that gap between your auditory intake and your speaking output.
So it forces the auditory pathway to instantly connect to the muscular pathway for speech production. That's a great way to think about it.
What about an exercise for focused granular accuracy? Something that forces you to hear every single sound, including those pesky word endings that get lost.
That would be dictation. This is a classic exercise that remains unparalleled for this purpose.
Okay, so how does it work?
You listen to a brief audio excerpt, a sentence or two, you pause it, and then you transcribe precisely what you've heard. Then you check your transcription against the original text. This is an unparalleled method for refining lexical accuracy and attentiveness to detail, forcing you to hear the subtle differences between tenses, that ate ending, plurals, the n ending, and grammatical elements that often get swallowed in rapid speech. It requires focused, microscopic listening.
So once you've performed the listening and the transcription, how do you know if you truly understood the deeper meaning and not just the words themselves?
The final check is summarization.
Okay.
After completing any listening task, whether it's a dictation, a podcast episode, or a chapter of an audiobook, you must endeavor to summarize the core tenets in your own words.
Verbally or in writing?
Either one, verbally or in writing. Challenge yourself to articulate the principal ideas, the main arguments, and the conclusion. This serves as an excellent metacognitive check on the depth of your comprehension.
So if you can't summarize it,
If you cannot summarize the content clearly and concisely, you did not truly apprehend the semantic meaning, even if you heard all the words.
let's return to the elephant in the room, that immense kaleidoscopic world of English accents. An advanced learner has to grapple with the Queen's English, General American, various Australasian inflections, and the myriad regional ways of speaking within those countries.
The strategic imperative here is broad exposure. It has to be. If your goals involve professional or social engagement in a global context, limiting your listening diet to a single homogenized accent is just self-sabotage.
Right.
You must actively seek media featuring speakers from disparate geographical origins to cultivate what we call perceptual flexibility. Start noting the specific differences, the rhotic versus non-rhotic R sounds, the different vowel placements, the unique stresses.
What's the emotional advice for dealing with the initial frustration of a new, unfamiliar accent? Say I switch from a clear American podcast to a dense Irish documentary, and I feel like I'm starting all over again.
It is entirely normal if immediate universal comprehension proves elusive. You absolutely must temper any incipient frustration.
It's okay to not get it at first.
It's more than okay. Each accent possesses unique phonetic and prosodic idiosyncrasies. The key strategy is incremental exposure. Start with short, low-stakes consumption. A 2-minute news clip featuring that accent.
Just a small dose.
A small dose. Gradually increase the duration. Consume media interviews, documentaries, news broadcasts featuring speakers from that specific region. The repetition is what acclimatizes your brain. That unfamiliar sound system eventually becomes less foreign.
Moving on to the symbiotic relationship between listening and speaking, they are not isolated skills. They actively feed each other. How do we practice both at the same time?
The research strongly advocates for sustained conversational practice. Seek out a language exchange partner, a tutor, or join a speaking club. Engage in dialogues where you consciously prioritize 2 things. First, attentive listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak. And second, articulate response. When you listen carefully, you naturally mirror the sophisticated vocabulary and grammatical structures you hear, and that elevates your own speech.
And even without an active partner, you can still practice that conversational link through imitative methods, right?
That's right. That is imitative practice or mimicry. Listen intently to how native speakers articulate particular phrases, not just the words, but the mood, the speed, the contraction.
Okay.
Then endeavor to replicate them, focusing on matching their cadence perfectly. This process is incredibly beneficial for both phonological accuracy and overall fluency, fostering a more naturalistic rhythm in your speech.
So if you hear someone say, "I'm going to the store," listen for that gonna contraction.
Listen for the gonna, practice it, and incorporate it into your active vocabulary.
This sounds like a real commitment, which brings us to the psychological elements required for success: patience and consistency.
Yes. We have to be transparent here. The refinement of listening skills is an incremental, protracted endeavor. It takes time.
There are no shortcuts.
There are no shortcuts. Instantaneous, transformative results are an unrealistic expectation. If you listen to a difficult podcast once and feel vexed by incomplete comprehension, that is entirely normal. The brain requires repeated exposure and deliberate effort to rewire its auditory processing circuits for a new language.
So the motivation needs to be sustained by celebrating the small wins.
Precisely. You must acknowledge and celebrate small victories. Perhaps today you effortlessly assimilated a novel phrase you heard, or you apprehended a nuanced idiomatic expression that was previously unfamiliar, or you understood 90% of a YouTube video that stumped you last week.
Right.
These granular epiphanies constitute genuine, measurable progress. Every increment of advancement contributes to the cumulative trajectory of improvement.
Finally, let's address the real-world application. The moment you are forced to use everything you've learned in a dynamic discourse. This is the moment where the rubber meets the road.
Indeed. Real-world listening is where all the theoretical scaffolding coalesces into practical application. You're immersed in a dynamic situation, compelled to simultaneously process complex information, comprehend nuance, and formulate a pertinent rejoinder. It is, initially, a daunting prospect, but with sustained, consistent practice in those controlled environments, engaging in spontaneous discussion becomes progressively less intimidating.
And what is the most crucial, stress-reducing tip for that live, dynamic interaction? Don't suffer in silence.
Do not shy away from seeking clarification. It is entirely permissible, indeed it's commendable, to interject with phrases like, "I apologize, could you perhaps rephrase that in a different way?
Or,
I missed the last part, could you clarify the meaning of that idiom?" Asking for help is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of a genuine learner who prioritizes understanding.
that is so critical. Proactive querying, as the sources call it, is a highly effective mechanism for both learning, because you get the precise clarification you need, and for demonstrating genuine engagement with the person you're talking to.
And your final charge: do not recoil from authentic, unfiltered auditory stimuli. Challenge yourself deliberately. Seek out complex, unscripted radio broadcasts, engaging talks on topics you find challenging. or serendipitous conversations with Anglophone acquaintances. It's all about deliberately navigating beyond the confines of your linguistic comfort zone, one difficult conversation at a time.
That's been an incredible overview. We've covered everything from the foundational analogy of infancy to the tactical use of subtitles and the necessity of managing that frustration.
We have completed a comprehensive journey today. We established listening as the base layer of the linguistic pyramid. We delineated the cognitive effort required for active listening versus passive hearing. We confronted the major challenges of accent diversity and speech velocity, and we provided a comprehensive suite of actionable strategies. Remember to practice the judicious use of controlled audio and subtitles, and embrace those active techniques like shadowing, dictation, and the vital role of proactive questioning in real-world application.
It's a structured approach designed to take you past that intermediate plateau. Our core message remains: keep practicing diligently, maintain resilient patience, and continue making that purposeful leap toward unparalleled English proficiency. You have the tools now to train your ears like an athlete trains a muscle.
And since achieving comprehensive comprehension is often about identifying the core message, even when you encounter those inevitable gaps, those missing words, consider this provocative thought for the road.
Okay.
Think about your native language. How often do you truly listen for every single conjunction, article, or auxiliary verb, versus simply trusting your ability to fill in the context based on high-frequency keywords?
Almost never. I get the gist.
Exactly. Applying that same level of confidence, contextual reliance, and predictive processing to English, despite the speed, might just be the final mental barrier you need to overcome to achieve true, spontaneous fluency.
That's a truly fascinating perspective, trusting your own brain to synthesize the whole picture. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive, and we encourage you to keep challenging those linguistic frontiers. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a mission that's incredibly specific, really practical, and honestly, it's critical for any advanced language learner. We're zeroing in on C2 listening skills. We really want to unpack why this skill can feel like that final steepest hill to climb, and then, map out some concrete strategies for turning what might feel like good comprehension into true superlative mastery.
And a very warm welcome to you, the learner, who's with us today. This is such a vital topic because C2 listening proficiency is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, it's the foundation.
Right.
It's the foundation that all your other advanced skills, your speaking, your reading, your writing, are really built on. We're trying to move beyond just, understanding the words to understand the intent, the unspoken context, and the intellectual architecture behind what's being said.
Okay, let's just jump right into that then. Let's define C2 listening proficiency. If you're in, say, a rapid-fire meeting with native speakers, or maybe you're listening to an unscripted academic lecture, what is that aha moment? What separates a really competent C1 listener from a C2 master?
Well, the C2 level, it fundamentally transcends the sort of mechanical processing of language. It goes so far beyond just recognizing sounds and vocabulary.
Okay.
C1 is about robust comprehension, which is great.
Yeah.
C2, though, is about deep contextualization. It's the ability to pick out the core salient ideas, the main points, even when you hit these pockets of ambiguity. Those moments.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you might miss a word or two, but the overall message, the speaker's actual stance, and the gist of it all remains completely intelligible to you.
So it's like the difference between missing a single puzzle piece but still being able to see the entire image from the context around it?
That is a perfect analogy. Exactly. And critically, C2 lets you infer things. Attitude, implication, subtle nuance. For example, if a speaker says, "That was an interesting proposal," and they pause or their tone just drops slightly,
right,
the C2 listener hears the word interesting, but they infer the real meaning, which is something like, "I really don't like that proposal, but I'm being too polite to say it directly."
You hear the subtext.
You recognize that subtle frustration, or maybe some hidden irony, in the delivery itself, not just the dictionary definition.
Yeah.
And that level of inference, that's pure cognitive agility.
That distinction, the ability to hear the frustration even if you didn't catch every single syllable, that is exactly the kind of sophisticated agility we're aiming for. It's the difference between just understanding and, true intellectual assimilation.
Absolutely.
Or, as we like to say, turning that knowledge into resilient confidence.
And that's our mission for you today, to guide you through some methodologies that will help build this unshakable confidence, especially when you're navigating those really complex, almost labyrinthine discussions in English.
Whether it's a super specialized lecture or a high-stakes professional chat.
Exactly. We want you to be prepared not just to follow the thread, but to critically engage with it and understand all the subtext that's woven in.
Okay, let's dive in. So let's start with the fundamental why. Your sources, they all seem to underscore this idea that even though listening is the first skill any of us ever develop, it often gets a surprisingly small amount of focus in advanced classes. Why does it hold such an indispensable position, yet so often get, pushed to the side?
It's a really profound and very common paradox. In advanced study, we tend to fixate on the skills of output.
Yeah.
Perfecting our speaking, polishing our writing.
They're reproductive skills.
Right. When in fact, listening is fundamentally the primal linguistic interface. I mean, just look at the very beginning of language acquisition. An infant, an adult beginner, it doesn't matter. The earliest, most voluminous interaction you have with a new language is always receptive. We're absorbing the ambient linguistic soundscape, the flow, the structure, the music of it, long before we can ever say a full sentence or write an essay.
So we're kind of absorbing the music of the language before we ever try to play the instrument ourselves. It's like studying the sheet music and listening to the masters before you even pick up the violin.
Exactly. And this profound exposure, it shapes two really critical underlying parts of linguistic mastery.
Yeah.
First is our phonological awareness, how sounds work together, how they link and reduce in natural speech. And second is our syntactical intuition.
Syntactical intuition.
Yes. When you listen to a lot of sophisticated English, you start to internalize these complex sentence structures, sometimes without ever formally studying them. Active, critical listening is the crucible, really. It's where our understanding of all the phonological intricacies, the prosodic features—
You mean like rhythm and stress?
the rhythm, the stress, the cadence of speech, and all the complex architectures of the language are implicitly forged.
And that really explains that whole foundation concept. We're not just training one skill in a vacuum, we're actually reinforcing the entire linguistic structure.
Absolutely. The benefits aren't siloed at all. Superlative listening acumen, it invariably augments and informs your capabilities right across the board. It is the foundational layer of the entire pyramid. Think about speaking. If you can accurately perceive the subtle stress patterns that native speakers use to emphasize meaning, that prosody, you can replicate them. And that makes your own speech instantly more fluent, more persuasive.
And more natural.
And if you're frequently hearing complex, well-structured subordinate clauses in lectures, your own writing will naturally start to incorporate that same sophistication. Listening gives you the mental blueprint.
And this is where it gets really practical, right? For anyone navigating professional or academic spaces, it stops being about comprehension and starts being about competence.
That's it. Listening is everywhere in the crucible of real-world interaction. Think about the professional world. A virtual negotiation, a rapid-fire Q&A after a presentation, even a social engagement where humor and sarcasm are flying around. Your auditory faculties are constantly trying to decipher not just the words, the explicit stuff, but the intent, the shifting tone, the underlying rhetorical strategy. The goal is always to decipher the subtext. To operate effectively at an advanced level, you need that perpetual discernment. It makes C2 listening not a luxury, but an absolute necessity for full professional immersion.
So if that foundation is weak, the whole structure suffers. Which brings us perfectly to the specific cognitive shift required at this high level that move from just passive reception to active, almost surgical scrutiny.
Precisely. It's a shift from simply hearing to engaging in critical, deep analysis. So let's articulate this crucial distinction that really marks the entry into C2 mastery. We are all day, just subjected to a barrage of auditory stimuli. The radio in the car, background conversations, media clips, that is mere hearing. It requires minimal cognitive input. But active, critical listening, that is an entirely different endeavor. It's a deliberate, high-energy mental act.
Okay, so let's get into the details of what that demands from you as a C2 learner. It definitely sounds like this isn't something you can do while you're multitasking.
You absolutely cannot. When you engage in active listening, you have to deploy a deliberate marshaling of your attentional resources. That means putting down the phone, closing the other tabs, and really focusing. It requires a concerted, high-level effort towards semantic comprehension, understanding the meaning within its context, and a conscious endeavor towards mnemonic retention.
So the ability to hold the key arguments in your head long enough to actually process and respond to them.
Exactly. It is not a passive input mechanism at all. It is a rigorous mental workout.
And this is where that C2 level analysis kicks in. It's moving beyond just understanding to actually making a judgment. What are the specific advanced cognitive demands on a critical listener during this rigorous mental workout?
Well, at the C2 level, critical listening extends way beyond just following the story. It involves an almost forensic analysis of the spoken word.
Forensic analysis, I like that.
You are tasked with identifying logical fallacies in a speaker's argument, spotting a straw man argument or a hasty generalization in real time. You have to discern authorial bias. You have to ask, is the speaker's tone betraying some vested interest that they're not explicitly stating? And you have to recognize sophisticated persuasive techniques, whether they're subtle or totally overt.
That level of analysis sounds exhausting. Can you give me a specific example of what that forensic analysis looks for, beyond just the words being said?
Certainly. It involves listening for what we could call delivery markers. For instance, if a speaker is using excessive filler words like or like, that often signals a lack of preparation or maybe cognitive insecurity about a particular point.
Right.
Conversely, a deliberate strategic pause can signal a moment of rhetorical gravity. Or it might be a sign they're about to pivot their argument. The C2 listener isn't just registering the words, they're analyzing the speaker's pace, their deliberate use of emphasis, their rhetorical timing, all to understand the argument's underlying structure and its emotional temperature.
That requires such a profound level of cognitive presence.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the payoff. What's the huge pragmatic utility for the learner? Why should you commit to this level of mental rigor?
The benefits are just enormous. Superior listening acumen. It facilitates more accurate, more nuanced articulation simply because you've absorbed the correct, sophisticated patterns of speech.
Okay.
It fosters a much more robust interpersonal rapport because you're truly engaged with the other person's message and their intent, which leads to better social and professional outcomes. And, crucially, it deepens your comprehension across all domains, allowing you to make truly insightful, timely contributions. Being a sharp, critical listener is a distinct advantage in any setting. It ensures you're always responding thoughtfully, not just reacting defensively.
You mentioned before the difficulty of just maintaining that cognitive discipline. It must be so hard to keep your brain in forensic analysis mode when a conversation speeds up or the concepts get really abstract.
It is remarkably easy to just let the linguistic complexity wash over you, especially when the speaker's cadence is fast or the concepts are highly abstract. The challenge of cognitive discipline is resisting that very natural human urge for mental ease, particularly when you're tired or distracted. If you let the words just dissipate into the cognitive ether without that critical scrutiny, you lose the opportunity for deep understanding. We have to practice sustained, deliberate attention, forcing ourselves to mentally map the argument structure even when our energy is waning.
Right, now that we've clearly established the necessity and the cognitive demands of C2 listening, let's pivot and acknowledge the real formidable challenges. We're talking about hurdles that go way beyond basic comprehension issues for learners who are already quite proficient.
One of the biggest initial obstacles is often the combination of sheer native delivery velocity with highly complex clausal structures. When native speakers are comfortable, they speak rapidly, and they often embed layers upon layers of dependent clauses within a single thought. This combination can create what feels like an amorphous, just an impenetrable sonic blur. And that rapid clip makes maintaining cognitive synchronicity, keeping pace with the thought process and simultaneously analyzing the implicit messages, extremely arduous.
I know for a lot of people, it's not even the speed, it's the sheer density of cultural and historical information that trips them up. It's like a secret code embedded right there in the vocabulary.
That is a key C2 barrier. The challenge is often the subtlety of implication or the cultural embeddedness of idiom. A beginner might struggle with a basic expression, but for you, at a C2 level, you need to discern the precise, subtle irony in calling someone a fair-weather friend, which is an idiom referencing reliability during adversity.
Okay.
Or, even more demanding, unpacking the deep historical and political baggage of an expression like crossing the Rubicon. This isn't something that's taught in a vocabulary list. It requires broad, deep cultural reference points.
So you need not just linguistic knowledge, but historical, political, and social context. The idiom itself is just compressed shorthand for a whole historical event or a philosophical concept.
Exactly. And we can't neglect the ubiquitous infiltration of highly specific jargon, arcane allusions, and multi-layered idiomatic expressions that are specific to a certain field. Native speakers, particularly in academic or high-level professional settings, they deploy domain-specific terminology that, if you subjected it to a literal translation, would instantly render the whole utterance nonsensical. This obscurity just immediately disrupts the intellectual thread. If you don't know the precise meaning of sequestration in a budget debate or epistemology in a philosophy lecture, you lose the entire context.
So it's the difference between missing a trivial word and missing the entire conceptual framework, just because one term acts as a gateway to a whole field of knowledge that the speaker assumes you already have.
Precisely. And then on top of all that, there is the insidious challenge of the environment and cognitive load.
Right.
Imagine trying to process a highly complex, dense debate, say, a live, unscripted argument about macroeconomic policy, while you're also dealing with background ambient noise, a poor microphone, or you're just mentally fatigued. The signal-to-noise ratio can become so degraded that trying to simultaneously focus on the speaker's articulation and analyze their argument becomes an exercise in, well, monumental futility.
In the moment you fall behind trying to process one difficult sentence, the next 5 sentences have already gone past you, and catching up just feels impossible.
It truly feels like an unending, fruitless struggle in that moment, like trying to hold water in your hands. And this is why we need resilient strategies. The goal is to move from simply identifying these complex problems to unveiling a suite of eminently practical stratagems designed to fortify your listening capabilities and surmount these C2-specific challenges even when the environment is hostile. All right, let's get right into the practical methodologies, the real nitty-gritty of enhancing your auditory comprehension at this advanced level. We need to be strategic about the material we choose. And a supremely effective starting point involves engaging strategically with both modulated and unfiltered audio.
How does one effectively scaffold their listening material at this level? It seems a bit counterintuitive for a C2 learner to still be relying on easier content.
It's not about easier content, it's about easier delivery. You should start your engagement with deliberately modulated audio. Initially, focus on speakers who are known for their exceptional clarity and organization people, like erudite TED lecturers, skilled broadcast journalists, or professional audiobook narrators.
Okay, so that's the scaffolding.
That's the scaffolding. The tempo is measured, the articulation is pristine, but the ideas are still very complex. Once you've built confidence in following complex content delivered clearly, then you move to unfiltered, authentic material.
Light.
Like live radio interviews, political talk shows, or public Q&A sessions where clarity is no longer guaranteed and interruptions are frequent.
That makes perfect sense. You start by mastering the complexity of the message under ideal conditions, and then you apply that analytical skill to messy, real-world delivery. Now let's tackle the elephant in the room. Subtitles. Many advanced learners feel like this is a crutch they have to avoid entirely.
It is not a crutch if it's used judiciously and with the specific C2 twist. Initially, when you're tackling a particularly dense or nuanced documentary, you can use English subtitles.
Okay.
Crucially, though, the C2 goal is to use subtitles not for basic comprehension, but to verify your inference. You have to listen actively, form a hypothesis about that complex phrase or idiom you just heard based on the context, and only then check the subtitle for confirmation.
That protocol changes everything. It's transforming a passive reading activity into an active metacognitive test.
Precisely. You are testing your ability to decode meaning when the auditory signal is weak or complex. For example, if you hear a speaker say, "The legislation was dead on arrival," you should pause. Infer that this means the legislation failed immediately, and then look at the subtitle to verify the exact idiomatic phrasing.
And then you phase them out.
Then, progressively, as your inferential comprehension strengthens, you have to gradually phase them out entirely, relying solely on your auditory processing.
I know a lot of people who fall into the trap of only listening once, getting frustrated by the gaps in their understanding, and just moving on. What does the strategy of iterative engagement offer to the C2 mind?
Iterative rewatching of video or re-listening to audio content is remarkably potent. The first viewing is dedicated to semantic comprehension, the what. Subsequent viewings will inevitably eliminate nuances, rhetorical devices, or subtle emotional cues that were initially overlooked because your cognitive load was just too high. On the second pass, your brain is familiar with the sequence and the general ideas, which frees up mental resources to focus on the how and the why, the structure, the vocabulary choice, the tone.
That's the key, shifting the focus. If you're not struggling just to understand the main points, you can dedicate those mental resources to a much deeper analysis.
Exactly. And this leads directly to the core C2 focus, argument structure. Even when the specific words fail you, you have to hold on to the thread. Even if a comprehensive understanding of every single lexical item eludes you, and it will sometimes, you must hone in on the thesis, the supporting evidence, the speaker's stance, and most importantly, any unstated assumptions.
So you're focusing on signal phrases and discourse markers, the architecture of the argument, rather than chasing every unfamiliar noun or verb.
That's it.
Can you give us a few examples of those C2 signal phrases we should be hunting for?
Certainly. When you hear phrases like, this inevitably leads us to the conclusion that, the main thesis is coming. If you hear, while one might argue that X, we must concede that Y, you are listening to a complex concession structure.
I see.
Phrases like subsequently, conversely, or to extrapolate this concept further are signposts. They allow you to mentally map the logical flow of a sophisticated argument, even if the vocabulary within the clauses is challenging. Focusing on these structural cues ensures you never lose the core intellectual direction.
Now, for the fun part, resource curation. We've established that you need material that challenges you conceptually, structurally, and culturally. So what are the perennial gold standard recommendations for our discerning advanced audience looking to hit that C2 mastery?
We invariably counsel engagement with high-density intellectual discourse, specifically academic lectures, advanced-level podcasts on special subjects, or unedited interviews with prominent public figures. These are just treasure troves of authentic, intellectually stimulating discourse. They are impeccable for honing both sophisticated comprehension and deep critical analysis, as the speakers just assume a high level of background knowledge from their audience.
Podcasts offer such unparalleled flexibility, right? You can integrate them into your daily routine, your commute, your chores, your workouts. But for C2 specifically, what genres or features should you be filtering for? What makes a podcast C2 material versus, say, C1?
For C2, the key is density and dynamism. You need to move beyond general news summaries. Focus on podcasts that delve into highly specialized fields, economic history, theoretical physics, or deep dives into philosophy that feature complex terminology and abstract concepts.
Right.
And crucially, look for podcasts with multiple speakers engaged in dynamic, unscripted debate. This format forces you to track rapid turns, overlapping speech, subtle shifts in tone, and how arguments are built and conceded in real time.
So high-level political panel discussions, maybe.
Exactly. Or detailed long-form interviews with specific experts on niche topics, where the host doesn't simplify the guest's jargon for the audience.
That multi-speaker dynamic is a fantastic challenge because you have to distinguish between different perspectives and voices, often tracking different accents at the very same time.
Absolutely. The cognitive load just multiplies dramatically. It demands true C2 focus. Now let's talk about written works translated into audio. Unabridged audiobooks are a fundamental resource here.
How does the judicious use of an audiobook advance C2 listening beyond just, enjoying a story?
Well, the judicious use of unabridged audiobooks of challenging literary works or dense nonfiction offers a unique structural advantage. They allow you to follow highly complex narrative arcs or intricate philosophical arguments over a really prolonged duration. This trains your long-term listening endurance and your cognitive memory.
Okay.
And on top of that, these works are often rendered by professional narrators whose elocution and pacing are exemplary, giving you a perfect model of high-level English delivery.
So what's the recommended progression path for audiobooks? Should you just jump straight into James Joyce?
Probably not initially, no. That would induce some unnecessary frustration. Progression is key. I'd say commence with linguistically accessible titles that still deal with complex themes. Perhaps works by accessible 20th century novelists or popular nonfiction books on complex topics like behavioral economics.
And then you level up.
Then you incrementally ascend to more structurally complex works, like the stream of consciousness narratives of Virginia Woolf or dense philosophical texts by thinkers like Foucault, where the ideas themselves require substantial intellectual processing. This gradual ascent ensures you stay motivated.
What if your preference leans heavily towards entertainment? How can you refine your skills while still enjoying the content?
For those whose predilections lean towards narrative entertainment, immersing yourself in critically acclaimed dramas, satirical comedies, or historical epics is a profoundly enjoyable avenue for auditory refinement. You'd want to start with productions that feature relatively straightforward modern dialogue, and then ambitiously challenge yourself with more lexically and structurally intricate narratives.
Like the political thrillers or courtroom dramas you mentioned before, why are those genres specifically so powerful for C2 learners?
Political thrillers and courtroom settings are fantastic because the language is inherently high stakes, it's dense with rhetorical strategy, and it's full of domain-specific terminology, legal or geopolitical jargon. Satirical comedies are also excellent, but only at the C2 level, because they rely so heavily on layers of cultural context, assumed social knowledge, and subtle irony for their humor. If you can understand the sophisticated satire of an advanced comedy, your comprehension of nuance is robust.
And a vital point about all media consumption, the ever-present subtitle temptation.
Indeed. While subtitles are an invaluable crutch at the start, especially for verifying complex legal or scientific terms, you must strive to wean yourself off them. The goal is to foster an unadulterated, independent auditory experience. If you remain reliant on the text, your brain will continually prioritize reading, which is easier, over the more difficult but ultimately more rewarding task of pure auditory decoding.
So a good challenge for you might be to watch one episode of a show you know really well, but without the subtitles this week.
That is a perfect challenge.
Sure.
Let's shift focus now to strategic interactive modalities. These techniques demand your active participation and are essential for pushing past that C1 plateau because they bridge the gap between input and output. One of the most profoundly effective is the advanced shadowing technique.
I've definitely practiced basic shadowing to improve my pronunciation, but how does the C2 level version differ from that basic practice? What's the mechanism of mastery here?
Well, the C2 goal transcends mere phonemic reproduction. The process is the same. You listen to a speaker and, almost concurrently, attempt to replicate their utterance. But the focus is on prosody mapping.
Prosody mapping.
You are mimicking not just the words, but the intonation, the rhetorical pacing, and the emotional inflection. For instance, if the speaker speeds up to express excitement or uses a deep, slow cadence for dramatic effect, you must mirror that.
So the goal is to train your auditory cortex and your vocal apparatus to match the language's inherent rhythm and flow, specifically focusing on how meaning is conveyed through those non-lexical elements.
Absolutely. You are internalizing the music of sophisticated delivery. This practice is instrumental in assimilating natural speech reductions and stress patterns, dramatically enhancing your fluency and making your own advanced speech sound natural and compelling.
Now let's talk about another potent but definitely demanding exercise, critical dictation. How does this differ from the dictation we might have done in beginner class?
Critical dictation is far more complex. It involves listening to a brief, dense audio excerpt, a challenging paragraph from a technical lecture, for example, pausing it, and transcribing precisely what you heard. But then comes the non-negotiable C2 step, analysis.
Right.
You must then analyze the grammatical structures, the specific lexical choices, and the rhetorical devices that were employed.
That is a high level of cognitive attentiveness. What are we looking for in that analysis step? What does that mean?
It means you're looking for patterns of sophisticated communication. For example, did the speaker use the passive voice to deliberately obscure who was responsible for an action? Did they use hyperbole or understatement? Did they employ a complex, non-standard inversion of sentence structure for emphasis? When you try to write down the exact construction, you reveal hidden gaps in your own perception. It's an unparalleled method for refining lexical accuracy, attentiveness to detail, and your linguistic analytical skills.
It sounds like critical dictation forces you to slow down the input and dismantle it structurally, which I guess helps when you have to process it quickly in real time later.
Exactly. It trains your brain to subconsciously recognize those high-level structures in real time. And finally, we have the critical summarizing technique, which acts as the ultimate metacognitive check.
Okay, walk us through the requirements for a C2 summary.
After you've listened to something, you must challenge yourself to articulate the core tenets of it. Articulate the principal ideas, the speaker's overarching thesis, the evidence they presented, and crucially, any counterarguments or implicit biases they revealed. And the strict requirement is that this summary must be articulated in your own sophisticated words. You have to avoid simply repeating the speaker's vocabulary. This serves as an excellent metacognitive check on the true depth of your comprehension. If you can't accurately and eloquently summarize a complex argument using appropriate synonyms and discourse markers, you haven't truly grasped it.
Let's address the elephant in the global room, shall we? Grappling with the sheer diversity of English accents. This is an indispensable part of comprehensive C2 listening, especially in a professional, international context. If you can only understand one type of English, your C2 certificate is largely theoretical, isn't it?
Indubitably. We traverse a linguistic landscape that is just peppered with myriad accents, RP, General American, various Australasian inflections, and the hundreds of regional idiolects within each country, not to mention English as spoken in India or Singapore or Nigeria.
Right.
The diversity can be profoundly disorienting, not just phonetically, but in the cultural inferences those accents might carry.
So what's the strategic imperative here? I mean, you can't possibly learn every single accent.
No, you can't. The strategy is broad, systematic exposure to a range of authentic, unscripted speech. You should deliberately seek out media where the accents are unfamiliar to you. Crucially, you should be noting how different accents might sometimes, perhaps unfairly, perhaps accurately color the perception of a speaker's authority or intent, because accent carries a lot of sociolinguistic weight. We have to acknowledge that each accent has its own unique phonetic and prosodic idiosyncrasies. Tempering your frustration when immediate universal comprehension proves elusive is key. You're building flexibility, not just knowledge.
So how do you cultivate that perceptual flexibility without constantly traveling the globe?
You have to consciously consume media interviews, specialized documentaries, news broadcasts, local radio programs from disparate geographical origins. Look for specific regional programming, a documentary about Scottish history, a news panel from South Africa, a local talk show from the American South, or a business report from Australia. This deliberate, systematic exposure is what cultivates that perceptual flexibility and, importantly, your sociolinguistic awareness. Make it a game. Listen to 10 minutes of a dialect you find challenging every single day.
Now, let's emphasize that paramount concept, connecting listening back to speaking. There is a deeply symbiotic relationship here.
This is fundamental. The more discerningly and critically you listen, the more you analyze structure, tone, and pacing, the more eloquently, persuasively, and appropriately you'll speak. The two exist in a mutually reinforcing relationship. Your input quality dictates your output quality.
Right.
Advanced listening gives you a vast library of sophisticated structures to choose from when you're constructing your own responses.
So how do we actively hone both of those skills concurrently?
Through sustained high-level conversational practice. You should seek out a dedicated language exchange partner, a skilled professional tutor, or advanced discussion groups centered around complex topics. Engage in dialogues where you consciously prioritize both attentive, critical listening, that forensic analysis we discussed, and the delivery of an articulate, well-reasoned response.
So don't just wait for your turn to speak.
Never. Actively categorize the previous speaker's points while they are still talking.
And what about that mimicry of mastery in imitative practice you mentioned?
Yes, advanced imitative practice is vital. Listen intently to how experts articulate complex arguments or nuanced viewpoints, especially how they signal transitions or use persuasive pauses. Then endeavor to replicate them precisely, focusing meticulously on their use of discourse markers.
You mean phrases like, however, or on the other hand?
Exactly, but more advanced ones. Like, however, we must differentiate between, or the counter-argument conversely suggests. You also want to mimic their use of rhetorical questions and persuasive intonation. This trains you not just to sound natural, but to sound sophisticated, structured, and commanding when you speak. So we have arrived at the pinnacle of listening mastery, the real-world C2 scenarios. This is where all the theoretical scaffolding we've been building finally coalesces into practical, high-stakes application.
Describe this dynamic environment for us. What does it look like when all these skills, accent comprehension, forensic analysis, structural mapping, have to fire simultaneously?
You are typically immersed in dynamic, often completely unscripted discourse. So, picture a high-stakes professional meeting with colleagues from 3 different countries, or a nuanced social interaction with diverse cultural undertones, or maybe an academic conference Q&A session where the questions are dense and they're coming at you fast. The compulsion here is complex. You have to simultaneously process the incoming information, critically comprehend it, and formulate a pertinent, sophisticated rejoinder with alacrity.
With quickness and intellectual agility.
Exactly. With cultural appropriateness. It is initially a daunting prospect, but with sustained immersion, it really does become second nature.
That pressure to respond quickly yet eloquently can sometimes cause learners to just recoil or hesitate. They're worried about missing the point or sounding unsophisticated. What's the power of strategic diplomatic inquiry in that scenario?
You should never recoil from strategic diplomatic inquiry for clarification. It is entirely permissible. In fact, it's highly commendable to interject. But you have to do so with a sophistication that signals your high level of engagement. You have to avoid the basic, "What did you say?"
Right.
Instead, structure your inquiry to show that you've grasped the complexity, but you just need one key element clarified.
Can you give us some examples of those sophisticated questions that show true engagement?
Of course. Rather than asking someone to repeat a whole sentence, you could use targeted questions like, "I apologize. Could you perhaps rephrase that last point using a different lexical choice? The previous technical term is unfamiliar to me." Or if they used figurative language, "I understand the general direction of your argument, but could you elucidate the implicit meaning behind that particular idiom in this specific context?" This demonstrates genuine analytical engagement rather than just a basic gap in comprehension, and it serves as a highly effective mechanism for both learning and just managing the pressure of the moment.
That's so powerful. It turns what could be a perceived weakness into a demonstration of intellectual rigor. Now let's underscore the crucial precept for sustained success, the twin virtues of mastery.
Patience and consistency. The refinement of listening skills to a C2 level is not a sudden epiphany. It is an incremental, protracted endeavor. Instantaneous, transformative results are a fanciful expectation.
A chimerical expectation.
Yes, it is entirely normal to experience moments of vexation or incomplete comprehension when you're confronted with highly complex material or very unfamiliar accents. This is simply part of the advanced learning continuum, and you have to accept that challenge gracefully.
So the goal is not perfection tomorrow, but marginal, resilient gain every single day.
Precisely. And it is absolutely imperative to acknowledge and to celebrate these granular epiphanies. Every increment of advancement, assimilating a novel lexical item that clarified a complex concept, apprehending a nuanced idiomatic expression that unlocked a deeper layer of meaning, or recognizing the rhetorical structure of a complex counterargument, it all contributes significantly to the cumulative trajectory of improvement towards C2 mastery.
Right.
Consistency, even in short, focused bursts of critical listening, trumps sporadic, intensive study every single time.
So the ultimate challenge then is forcing yourself out of that linguistic comfort zone into the truly demanding terrain.
Yes. You must deliberately navigate beyond the confines of your comfort zone. Challenge yourself with complex, unscripted radio debates, or actively seek out serendipitous conversations across various registers and sociolects that you usually avoid. Embrace the occasional moment of ambiguity. Trust your inferential ability, and the proficiency will inexorably follow.
Wow. This has been a deeply insightful and intensely practical deep dive into auditory mastery. We've covered some crucial ground today, from redefining C2 listening as inferential and forensic analysis, to understanding the strategic necessity of grappling with diverse global accents, and finally, detailing the actionable power of interactive modalities like advanced shadowing and critical dictation.
Indeed. And you should remember, this is not a short sprint. It's a prolonged, consistent journey that requires intellectual tenacity.
Wow.
By making critical listening a daily practice, focusing on why and how a speaker delivers a message, not just what they say, the transformative impact on your overall linguistic competence will become unequivocally manifest.
And as our final provocation and challenge for you, consider this. Your newly refined ability to critically assess implicit biases, rhetorical strategies, and the cultural subtext of spoken English, which is the true hallmark of C2 skill, will fundamentally change how you consume media and engage in complex debates moving forward. We challenge you this week to actively explore media from 3 geographically disparate origins. Focus solely on the speaker's persuasive intent and their unstated assumptions. Don't worry about the vocabulary, focus on the structure and the subtext. Until next time, keep challenging those linguistic frontiers.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into something that's really foundational, but it's something that often gets pushed to the background when we talk about reaching that absolute peak of language mastery. We're talking about C2 listening proficiency.
Right.
And I want to be clear, we're not just talking about being able to understand the news. We're talking about real cognitive fluency.
Exactly. And I think our mission today is, well, it's pretty critical. We need to move past that idea of just basic comprehension.
Right.
And really dig into the immense value of high-level listening. We need to map out some specific, actionable strategies for actually improving this skill.
Because it's a constant process.
It's a constant process.
Yeah.
And look, listening is the bedrock. It's the absolute foundation of language mastery. It's the original way we learn, preceding and, frankly, shaping every other skill you develop.
So what we're really chasing here is true cognitive agility. The end goal isn't just to hear the individual words, but to absorb the entire intellectual and emotional landscape of a conversation.
Yes.
No matter how fast it is or how complex, it's about being truly present in the language.
That's a great way to put it, present in the language. Because if we think of, say, language mastery as climbing a mountain,
Okay.
speaking and writing, they're often seen as the summit, right? That's the glorious peak. But listening is the base camp. It's the strength of your rope. It's the map that guides the whole climb.
Without it, you're stuck.
Completely stuck. Without C2 listening, all the other skills, they just stall out. They get stuck at B2, maybe a low C1, because they just can't handle the authentic velocity and the nuance of native speech.
Which I think brings us right to the heart of it, the defining characteristic of C2 listening. And I want you, the listener, to think about this scenario, because you've probably been there. You're in a complex English discussion, maybe it's an academic lecture, or a really fast-paced meeting at work.
Right, high stakes.
High stakes. And you might miss a word here, a technical phrase there.
Yeah.
But you still get it. You still manage to pull out the main meaning and even infer what the speaker's really getting at, their attitude, their mood.
Yes.
What is happening in that cognitive gap that lets you succeed?
That ability, that is the absolute peak performance of C2 listening. That ability to bridge the gap, it goes so far beyond what we call phonemic recognition.
So just hearing the sounds.
Just hearing the individual sounds, yes. Instead, it's fundamentally about contextualization. You're using every single piece of the discourse around that gap. The prosody, the sentence that came before, the speaker's tone, the shared cultural context. You're using all of it to paint a complete, coherent picture.
So it's like high-speed pattern recognition. You're not just translating word for word, you're predicting and confirming what should be there.
You are. C2 listening means you're identifying the salient ideational nodes.
The core ideas.
The core ideas, exactly, even when there's ambiguity. And this is the critical part. It's about inferring attitude, implication, and nuance. It's the difference between hearing someone say, that was an interesting proposal, and knowing whether they meant it was genuinely interesting or if that was a deeply sarcastic way of shutting it down completely.
The words are identical.
Identical, but the implication is completely inverted. And being able to catch that instantly, that's C2.
That really is the gold standard, isn't it? It's not about passing a vocabulary test in real time. It's about processing language the way a high-functioning native speaker does, just using all that context to fill in the gaps without even pausing.
Absolutely. C2 proficiency means you're apprehending the entire discourse. You're interpreting the subtext even when you run into an unknown word or a really tangled grammatical structure. You're using the sophisticated cognitive agility.
Which you have to build.
Which you have to build, yes, through sustained, deliberate practice. And that agility lets you stay in sync with the speaker's meaning. You remain intellectually aligned with the argument, even if a tiny detail is momentarily fuzzy. The goal is to never feel lost.
And that mechanism, that ability to guess and guess accurately, it relies completely on the quality and the sheer quantity of the receptive input you've built up over years. It's like you're running this massive internal database of linguistic patterns in the background.
It is, and that's why we have to stress that C2 listening is a skill you build over time. It's not a switch you just flip one day. It requires accepting that ambiguity is normal and learning to use inference as your number one analytical tool. If you wait for absolute certainty on every single word, you will lose the thread of the entire conversation. Guaranteed.
So let's start at the very beginning, the root of it all. Listening as the primal linguistic interface. When we talk about how humans acquire language, any language, listening has to come first, non-negotiable, right?
It's the natural order. I mean, just consider how it all starts. In infancy, a child's earliest interaction with language it's overwhelmingly receptive.
Vaguely.
They're not speaking, they're not writing, they are just absorbing the ambient linguistic soundscape. They're literally building an internal mental model of the language's rhythm, its common phrases, its tone, just by being bathed in it every day.
And that same principle, maybe a bit more accelerated and obviously more conscious, it applies directly to adult English acquisition. We get so focused on the output, on speaking and writing, that we kind of forget the fundamental shaping effect that our receptive skills have on our entire linguistic foundation.
It's like trying to build a really complex piece of software without ever gathering any data.
Right.
That input exposure, it profoundly shapes two really interconnected things. First, your phonological awareness. So how sounds work together, how they merge and change in real fast speech. Think of I'm going to becoming I'm gonna.
Connected speech.
Exactly. And second, your syntactical intuition. That's that little inner voice that tells you, even if you can't name the grammar rule, that a sentence just feels right or wrong.
So active listening, especially at the C2 level, it isn't passive at all. It's you call it the crucible, where our understanding of the language's internal architecture is forged. You mentioned prosodic features. Let's define that quickly because it's so key.
Right. Prosodic features, that basically refers to the music of the language, the rhythm, the stress, the pitch. It's how we say things, not just what we say.
The melody.
The melody, perfect. And superior listening gives you this intuitive grasp of the language's natural rhythm and cadence. If you don't master English prosody, your own speech will always sound a little stilted, a bit robotic.
And your comprehension suffers too.
Oh, massively, because stress and intonation often carry the most important information or the speaker's true intent.
So these benefits aren't isolated. They're not in silos. They fundamentally reinforce every other part of your language ability.
Unequivocally. I mean, superior listening acumen will invariably augment your abilities in speaking, in reading, and in writing. It functions as the bedrock, the foundation of the entire linguistic pyramid. It informs and strengthens everything else.
It makes sense. If your understanding of a complex topic is flawed because you misheard it, how can you possibly articulate an accurate response?
You can't. Or write coherently about it. The strength of that foundation determines the strength and resilience of the whole structure.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me, and frankly, it's where a lot of advanced learners get tripped up. The huge distinction between just hearing and active, critical listening.
Yes.
We're all bombarded with sound all day. Traffic, music, chatter, that's just hearing. It's a biological process. But active, critical listening, that is a whole different beast. It's a profound cognitive skill set.
It demands a complete shift in your cognitive approach. Critical listening requires a deliberate marshaling of your attentional resources. It's a focused effort towards deep semantic comprehension, understanding the meaning, paired with a conscious effort towards mnemonic retention.
Making it stick.
Making it stick, exactly. So it stays with you beyond the moment the speaker finishes their sentence. This is not passive intake. This is very active processing.
And at the C2 level, we're moving beyond just understanding the explicit words. We're analyzing how they're being used and often why they're being used that way.
Exactly. Critical listening extends into analytical territory. We're looking for logical coherence. You start asking yourself, are there logical fallacies in this person's argument? Can I detect a bias? Am I recognizing the specific rhetorical tricks they're using to persuade me?
That requires a huge amount of cognitive presence. You have to be right there in the moment, doing an almost forensic analysis of the spoken word.
Forensic analysis. I love that. Let's take an example. What does that look like in practice? Imagine you're listening to a political debate. A forensic listener isn't just tracking the points being made, they're tracking the delivery. They notice when a speaker uses a false dichotomy, presenting only two options when there are clearly more, or when they use an appeal to emotion instead of an appeal to fact. They're analyzing the register. Is the speaker shifting from very technical jargon to super informal language to try and connect with a certain part of the audience? You're not just a receiver anymore. You're an analyst, actively decoding intent and strategy.
I remember when I first started training myself to do that. It takes so much discipline to resist the urge to just let the linguistic, deluge just wash over you.
It does.
Especially in a fast debate where you have to hold 3 or 4 points in your head at once.
It is remarkably easy for complex words to just enter your ear and then poof. They dissipate into cognitive ether, especially if you're tired or distracted. But by embracing this rigorous active approach, you enhance your ability to see those contextual nuances and interpret the implicit meanings. And this isn't just some academic theory. This has huge practical value in the real world.
Okay, let's connect it. Real world impact. Better listening directly leads to more accurate speaking because you're responding to the actual nuanced argument.
Not just your misinterpretation of it, and it fosters more robust interpersonal rapport, too. Think about it. When you show someone that you truly understood the deeper meaning of what they said, especially in a sensitive conversation, that's powerful.
It shows you're actually engaged.
It shows you're present, you're engaged, and it builds trust. And of course, it deepens your comprehension across all professional and social domains, which lets you make truly insightful contributions. Being a sharp, critical listener is always a distinct advantage. It gives you an edge.
In a high-stakes meeting or an intense academic seminar, your ability to come up with an appropriate, sophisticated response is directly proportional to how well you process the initial input.
Absolutely.
If you misunderstand the nuance of a contract negotiation or misinterpret a complex scientific finding, the consequences can be pretty severe. C2 listening minimizes that risk because you grasp the complexity the first time.
And critically, it saves time. When you don't have to constantly ask for repetition or clarification of concepts, the efficiency of your communication and your ability to lead or contribute meaningfully, it just skyrockets.
Okay, so we've established the why. The foundational importance is clear. Now let's talk about the obstacles.
Yeah.
Because the rewards are huge, but the journey to C2 fluency is, well, it's filled with some really formidable hurdles that are unique to this advanced level.
Absolutely. The first, and maybe the most immediate challenge, is deciphering native speakers in complex real-world situations. And this difficulty really stems from two key factors: the sheer velocity of their delivery.
It's brutal.
And the ubiquitous deployment of sophisticated linguistic shortcuts.
That velocity, we're not just talking about raw speed, we're talking about connected speech, right? Where sounds get dropped or absorbed or blended together. Yeah. Native speakers talk at such a rapid clip, and they do it using these complex clauses and nuanced prosody. Trying to maintain that cognitive synchronicity just to grasp the implicit message, it becomes genuinely arduous.
Think about all those functional words that just get reduced to almost nothing. What do you want to do becomes what I want to do.
Right.
Now, if you, as a C2 learner, are still expecting to hear what do you want to do, clearly separated, that actual compressed stream of sound can feel like, especially with an unfamiliar topic or a new accent, it can feel like an amorphous, impenetrable sonic blur.
Your brain is wasting energy.
It's spending way too much energy just trying to separate the syllables instead of processing the meaning.
And that rapid pace just makes the next major hurdle even worse.
Yeah.
The subtlety of implication and the cultural embeddedness of language.
Yes. For the C2 learner, the challenge isn't recognizing a simple metaphor anymore. It's decoding that deep, often unstated cultural context that's baked right into the language itself.
Let's compare it, a beginner's challenge.
Okay, a beginner's challenge is understanding a simple, easily substituted idiom. For instance, realizing that it's raining cats and dogs just means it's raining heavily. That's a straightforward two-dimensional substitution.
But at C2, the task is way more nuanced. It might be about discerning the subtle irony or the veiled criticism in a statement that, on the surface, sounds like a compliment.
Precisely. Imagine someone describes a colleague who only helps out when a project is going well as a fair-weather friend. The literal definition of friend is inverted here. It implies a profound lack of loyalty based on circumstances. To get that, you need to understand the cultural expectation of friendship and that specific metaphorical use of fair weather.
Or what about a more historical one? Unpacking the significance of an expression like crossing the Rubicon.
That requires deep cultural literacy. You need immediate intuitive recall of the fact that when Julius Caesar crossed that river, it was an irrevocable, high-stakes decision that meant civil war.
No turning back.
No turning back. If you only interpret it literally, just crossing some river, you miss the entire gravity of the speaker's message. That a decision has been made from which there is no return. These are cultural shortcuts that assume a vast shared knowledge base that you have to actively build for yourself.
And that complexity just skyrockets when we move into specialized fields. Now we're talking about the pervasive infiltration of highly specific jargon, arcane allusions, and multi-layered idioms, especially in academia or professional settings.
It's huge.
You don't just need linguistic fluency anymore. You need subject matter expertise in that specific field.
This is where the concept of a sociolect becomes crucial. A sociolect is just the dialect of a particular social class or profession or group. And native speakers, particularly when they're talking shop, whether it's medicine, finance, tech, they love to pepper their speech with these casual locutions or domain-specific terms.
And the problem is, if you try a literal general translation of that terminology, the whole sentence just becomes nonsense.
Total nonsense. Take the world of finance. If a speaker says they need to pivot to a long-tail strategy because the current approach is cost prohibitive, and you only know the basic definitions of pivot or long-tail, you've missed the entire operational meaning.
The intellectual thread is gone.
It's completely obscured because you missed or misinterpreted the core lexical markers. You can have perfect general grammar and vocabulary and still miss the point entirely because you lack that specific sociolect.
Okay, and finally, we can't ignore the real-world factors that constantly mess with C2 performance. I think the most insidious challenge is background ambient noise combined with a high cognitive load.
It's so important, and it rarely gets enough attention in textbooks.
Right.
Studying alone in a quiet room is one thing, but engaging in a high-level discussion in the real world, a bustling trading floor, a crowded international conference, even a Zoom call with one person who has a terrible microphone.
Oh, the worst.
The signal-to-noise ratio can be so degraded that just trying to simultaneously focus on the speaker's articulation, analyze their complex argument, and filter out all the distraction becomes an exercise in cognitive overload.
Your attentional resources are just fractured. You're dual tasking. You're trying to understand the content while fighting the physical environment.
The moment you have to ask the speaker to repeat themselves, or you realize you've lost the central thread of their argument for the 10th time, you've hit that cognitive wall. And this is unique to C2 because the complexity of the content is already pushing your processing capacity to its limits.
Adding environmental stress just breaks it completely.
That does.
This isn't just about trying harder, though. It's about building specific resilience. So let's transition now. Let's get into the eminently practical stratagems designed specifically to fortify your auditory skills against these C2 specific challenges.
Let's do it. We need targeted training, not just more listening hours.
All right, our training approach needs to be hyper-specific for C2. We're moving beyond just general practice and into focused analytical methodologies. And the first step is about the careful selection and use of authentic material.
Right. A supremely effective starting point is to engage immediately with unfiltered authentic material, but with a bit of scaffolding. I always advise starting with speakers who are known for their clarity and articulate delivery.
Like who?
Erudite lecturers, seasoned public speakers, skilled debaters. This acts as an initial scaffold. It lets you absorb complex content that's presented at a measured, high-quality pace.
The digital world is a goldmine for this. High-quality university lectures, professionally produced TED Talks, detailed explainer videos. They use a measured tempo and articulate with pristine clarity, which is invaluable for building confidence before you jump into a rapid-fire, unstructured debate.
Exactly. But now, here's the critical C2 twist on using subtitles.
This is so important.
It is crucial. For C2 training, subtitles are not a crutch for understanding words you don't know. They are a precise analytical tool used to verify your inference.
If you just read along, you're turning off your ears.
You're completely deactivating your auditory processing system.
I found this strategy to be transformative. You immerse yourself in a really nuanced documentary or a thought-provoking panel discussion with English subtitles on,
right?
But you actively try to ignore them unless you are truly stuck. You try to infer the meaning of a tricky idiom or the specific intent of a complex sentence in real time.
And only then, only after you've committed to your own interpretation, do you glance at the subtitle to confirm your comprehension and your contextual guess. If you were right, fantastic. Your inferential skills are sharp. If you were wrong, you analyze why. Why did the context lead you to the right meaning? What specific lexical or prosodic cue did you miss?
And the strategic progression here is key. Once your inferential comprehension really starts to blossom, you have to progressively phase those subtitles out entirely. You have to rely solely on your ears and your own metacognition, your ability to think about your own thinking.
And on that note, don't underestimate the power of iterative rewatching or re-listening. We often treat audio content as this disposable thing you consume once and then file away.
Right.
But going back to the same complex material is remarkably potent. The first time through, you're just scrambling to get the basic meaning. The second time, you're free to notice the rhetorical devices, the subtle emotional cues, the structural patterns that you completely missed the first time because your cognitive effort was so high.
Building on that, the next methodology is essential for getting past that word-by-word translation trap, deliberately honing in on the argumentative structure rather than getting fixated on every single word.
This is the skill that separates the translator from the true C2 communicator. Even if a complete understanding of every single noun and verb eludes you, your main task has to be to hone in on the framework.
The blueprint.
The blueprint. What's the speaker's main thesis? What's the core evidence they're offering? What's their definitive stance? Are they for or against this position? And, crucially, what are the unstated assumptions that form the backbone of their entire argument?
The vocabulary is just the color, but the structure is the architecture. At C2, you have to identify the architecture first. You can miss some of the color and still grasp the fundamental design.
A great tip here is to consciously try to map out the structure in your head as you listen. Introduction of problem, proposed solution, evidence A, B, C, anticipated counter-arguments, conclusion. If you can fill in those mental headers, you have C2 comprehension, no matter how complex the jargon is that's used to fill them out.
Now let's pivot to an interactive technique that has been, for me personally, instrumental in developing a more natural rhetorical flair, the advanced shadowing technique.
Profoundly effective method, often called mimicry of mastery. This is active, high-intensity training.
So it's listening to a speaker and almost concurrently trying to replicate what they're saying, like a shadow following the original speech just a second or two behind.
Yes.
And the key difference from simple repetition is the focus. It's not just about pronunciation. It's an intense replication of the entire delivery ecosystem, the intonation, the rhetorical pacing, and the emotional inflection.
This simultaneous replication is instrumental because it forces you to assimilate those prosodic features immediately. You are training your auditory vocal loop, that connection between what you hear and how you produce it, to instantly recognize and process native sound patterns.
So you start to internalize the melody.
Exactly. If you don't instantly internalize that rising pitch that signals a question or the slight pause used for emphasis, your own speech won't sound natural, and your brain will take longer to process those same cues when you hear them in real time.
And the beautiful thing is, this practice doesn't just improve your speaking, it improves your listening comprehension, because you're physically producing the complex sound reductions and stresses that native speakers use. That makes them immediately recognizable when you hear them again.
And your first few attempts don't need to be flawless. The goal is just to train that loop.
Right. So moving from active mimicry to deep analysis, let's talk about two critical feedback loops for C2 learners: critical dictation and rigorous summarization.
Okay.
Let's start with critical dictation. Most people probably associate dictation with like grade school spelling tests, but this is different.
Very different. This involves listening to a brief, complex audio excerpt, maybe 30 to 60 seconds of a dense academic discussion. You pause it, you transcribe exactly what you heard, and then comes a crucial analytical step.
You're not just checking for typos.
No. You analyze the grammatical structures, the speaker's specific word choices, the rhetorical devices they used.
So if they use the passive voice, you ask yourself why. Were they trying to de-emphasize the actor in the sentence? If they used a highly formal word, was it appropriate for the context? This level of granularity refines your lexical accuracy and your analytical skills at the same time.
It forces hyper-attentiveness to detail, and it often highlights where your own phonological perception is weakest. For example, maybe you frequently confuse there and there in fast speech, or you keep missing the yes on the end of a verb because of the speaker's speed.
And then the ultimate metacognitive check on your comprehension depth is critical summarization. So after any complex listening task, a podcast, a lecture, a panel, you challenge yourself to articulate the main ideas, the overarching argument, the evidence presented, and any counter-arguments or biases you detected.
All in your own sophisticated words.
Exactly. Articulating it in your own advanced lexicon proves whether you truly internalize the information or if you just vaguely recognize the words as they flew by. This comprehensive recap verifies your analytical prowess and your ability to synthesize complex auditory data into a cohesive form.
If you can't summarize an abstract concept clearly in a way that someone else can understand, you haven't really mastered the C2 input.
It's the difference between recognition and application.
Yeah,
application. That's C2. Okay, to get to C2, learners have to move past the general scripted news broadcasts and into a really curated selection of genuinely challenging resources. We need sources that actively promote the vocabulary of abstract thought and complex structure.
My perennial advice is to seek out sources that mirror the highest communicative demands. This means academic lectures from fields known for dense language, think history, philosophy, theoretical physics.
Right.
We also recommend advanced level podcasts on specialist subjects, international trade law, biomedical ethics, complex geopolitical analysis, and finally, unedited interviews with prominent public figures where the speaker is under pressure and might be using spontaneous, unscripted, complex rhetoric.
I have to wholeheartedly endorse the deep dive into specialist podcasts. They offer this unparalleled opportunity for immersive daily engagement. But for a C2 focus, the material has to feature complex terminology, abstract concepts, or, my favorite, multiple speakers engaged in a dynamic, often antagonistic debate.
Yes, you need that friction.
You need that friction, that challenging back and forth flow. That's what truly challenges your interpretive faculties, because the arguments build and shift so quickly.
And when you're selecting these podcasts or lectures, don't just choose a topic you already like. Choose one that forces you into unknown vocabulary territory. If you're comfortable with economics, go listen to a podcast on contemporary art theory. That deliberate exposure to new sociolects is absolutely essential.
An equally great option, and one that I think is often overlooked for its listening value, is the judicious use of unbridged audiobooks of challenging literary or dense nonfiction.
These offer a unique advantage. You get complex narrative arcs, nuanced character development, or intricate philosophical arguments, and they're typically rendered by narrators whose elocution and professional pacing are just exemplary.
And the complexity of the source material is really key here. You can start with something linguistically accessible, but you have to incrementally climb up to more challenging works masterpieces by authors like James Joyce or Virginia Woolf, or highly technical philosophical texts. Why Woolf specifically? What's the benefit there?
Woolf employs stream of consciousness, a narrative style that deliberately mimics the disorganized, flowing, and deeply internal nature of human thought. Her sentences are often long, with subordinate clauses piled upon subordinate clauses, reflecting these highly intricate intellectual threads.
Look, a workout for your brain.
It's pure C2 processing training. Listening to it forces your brain to hold complex syntactical structures in your working memory while you're still processing the meaning.
And for those who lean more towards entertainment, the same complexity rule applies. You have to move beyond simple sitcoms with predictable plots and transparent dialogue.
Immerse yourself in critically acclaimed dramas, nuanced satirical comedies, or historical epics. These narratives are inherently rich in linguistic nuance, cultural allusion, and elevated vocabulary. They require you to follow complex relationships and subplots that rely on implied rather than explicit communication.
So you start there, and then you ambitiously challenge yourself with more lexically and structurally intricate narratives, like political thrillers or courtroom dramas.
Right.
In those genres, every single word choice, every legal or political maneuver is critical to the plot. This moves you from passive enjoyment to active analytical listening, but in an entertaining format. You're forced to listen critically just to anticipate the next twist.
Now let's tackle a truly unavoidable element for any C2 aspirant who's aiming for global fluency: navigating the kaleidoscope of English accents.
It's indispensable.
Grappling with accent diversity is an indispensable facet of comprehensive proficiency, especially if your goals include international engagement.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in a world peppered with myriad accents.
Yeah.
The canonical Queen's English and General American, various Australasian and Canadian inflections, and of course a plethora of regional idiolects within each of those major areas. Think Scottish, Deep South American, or South African English.
And each one possesses unique phonetic and prosodic idiosyncrasies that can completely derail your comprehension if you haven't trained for them.
So what's the strategy?
The strategic imperative here is not just passive exposure, but broad, systematic exposure to a range of authentic, unscripted speech. For instance, an American learner might be completely thrown off by the use of the glottal stop in some UK accents, where a T sound in the middle of a word might just be dropped completely.
And a learner familiar with UK English might struggle with the strong rhoticity, the pronounced R sounds, in many North American and Irish accents.
Exactly. And you have to specifically note how different accents might color the perception of a speaker's authority or intent. An accent that's associated with prestige in one country might carry more regional, perhaps less formal connotations in another. You need that sociolinguistic awareness to decode those layers of meaning.
And it's crucial to temper that initial frustration if you don't understand everything immediately. If you struggle with a strong Jamaican patois or a particularly dense Glasgow accent, that's normal.
It's completely normal. The more pervasive your exposure, the more acclimatized your auditory system will become, allowing you to not just understand the words, but to interpret the cultural and social context they carry. Consuming media interviews, news, documentaries from disparate geographical origins cultivates essential perceptual flexibility.
Okay, so finally, we arrive at the peak of application. Real-world C2 scenarios. This is where all the theoretical scaffolding finally comes together into practical, high-stakes application. You're testing your ability to perform under pressure.
This involves navigating dynamic, often unscripted discourse. Think of leading a high-stakes professional meeting, engaging in a nuanced social interaction with people from diverse cultural backgrounds, or participating in an intense Q&A session at an academic conference.
The demand there is supreme.
It's supreme. You have to simultaneously process incredibly complex information, critically comprehend the implicit and explicit meanings, and then formulate a pertinent, sophisticated rejoinder with alacrity, that is, with speed and intelligence.
That pressure cooker environment is the true test, and sustained immersion makes it progressively less intimidating. But what if you genuinely miss something crucial? Here's a key piece of advice for navigating those complex environments. Don't be afraid of strategic, diplomatic inquiry for clarification.
This is not a failure.
It is not a failure, it's advanced communication.
Absolutely. It is entirely permissible, in fact, it's commendable, to interject not because you missed a basic word, but because you're seeking high-level semantic clarification. It demonstrates engagement, not incompetence. You're signaling that you understood 90% and you're just trying to confirm that final critical 10%.
And the phrasing matters so much. You avoid saying things like, "What did you say?" Instead, you use sophisticated tools like, "Could you elucidate the implicit meaning behind that particular idiom in this context?"
Or, "I apologize, could you perhaps rephrase that last concept using different terminology, just to ensure I grasp the full scope?"
That nuanced querying is a highly effective mechanism for both learning and for demonstrating genuine, sophisticated engagement with the person you're speaking to. It proves you're listening critically, not passively.
And the final step is just to consistently seek out authentic, unfiltered auditory stimuli. Challenge yourself with complex podcasts, unscripted radio debates, or even just serendipitous conversations in various registers. That constant exposure is your final training ground.
It's all about deliberately navigating beyond the safe, scripted confines of your linguistic comfort zone and into that richer, more demanding terrain of C2 proficiency.
As we get to the end of this deep dive, we really have to underscore the twin virtues of patience and consistency. The refinement of listening skills to a C2 level, it's not a sprint. It's an incremental, protracted endeavor.
Right.
Expecting instantaneous, transformative results is, regrettably, a false expectation.
It's entirely understandable to have moments of just vexation. Frustration. When you're confronted with incomplete comprehension of highly complex material, especially with rapid native speech or dense jargon. But you have to recognize that's not a failure. It's an entirely normal phase in the learning continuum.
And consistency leads to resilience. The more assiduously you engage in the practice, embracing the inherent ambiguity, the more proficient and resilient your auditory capabilities will become.
And it is absolutely imperative to acknowledge and celebrate the small victories. Maybe today you assimilated a new lexical item that clarified a complex concept for you. Or you instantly understood a nuanced idiom that unlocked a deeper layer of meaning without you having to look it up. Those granular epiphanies, those moments of recognition that constitutes genuine, measurable progress towards C2 mastery.
Every increment of advancement, no matter how small it seems, contributes to that cumulative trajectory of improvement. With steadfast consistency and intellectual tenacity, the transformative impact on your overall communication skills, how clearly, eloquently, and persuasively you can speak, will become unequivocally manifest.
So what does this all mean for the big picture, for the listener who wants to be truly fluent?
The final synthesis is this. Listening and speaking exist in a symbiotic, mutually reinforcing relationship. They feed each other. The more discerningly and critically you listen, the more eloquently, persuasively, and appropriately you will speak. Your input quality dictates your output quality. Poor listening skills guarantee poor responses. Excellent listening skills open the door to true rhetorical mastery.
On that note, we'll leave you with this final provocative thought for reflection. C2 listening proficiency is fundamentally about the quality of the questions you ask yourself while you're listening. Are you running a mental analysis of structure, tone, and intent? Or are you just tracking vocabulary?
Ask yourself, are you consistently seeking out the most demanding, authentic, unfiltered auditory stimuli available, or are you still relying on resources designed for B2 learners? Your answer defines your path to mastery. Go listen to something that scares you today.